The Belmont Hotel smelled like 100 years of glamour, 2 decades of neglect, and approximately 47 gallons of industrial-grade mildew. Also, Poppy thought, stepping over a chunk of crumbling plaster the size of her cat, desperation. It smelled like desperation, too. "Stop right there!" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the frescoed ceiling of what had once been the grand lobby. "Cease and desist. Put that weapon down." A burly foreman in a hard hat froze, his sledgehammer raised mid-swing above a wall that was absolutely 100% not on the demolition list. He looked at Poppy. He looked at the wall. He looked back at Poppy, who was brandishing her clipboard like a crucifix at a vampire. "Lady, I got orders." "Your orders are wrong." Poppy marched toward him, her sensible but cute combat boots crunching on decades of debris. She was a historic preservation consultant, which meant she spent her days fighting rich people who wanted to turn beautiful old things into ugly new things. It was exhausting, thankless work, and she had the coffee addiction and the permanent side-eye to prove it. "This wall is original 1928 plaster. It's got a hand-painted mural underneath that peeling wallpaper. You demolish this, you're not just knocking down drywall, you're committing architecture eyeside." The foreman lowered the hammer, confused. "Archie, what now?" "She means vandalism," a deep, smooth voice said from behind her. "The expensive kind." Poppy whirled around. "Oh no, oh no, no, no." Leo Calder emerged from the shadows of the lobby like he owned the place, which, she reminded herself bitterly, he basically did. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than her monthly student loan payments. His dark hair was perfectly disheveled, like he'd just run his hands through it after closing a billion-dollar deal. His jaw could cut glass. His eyes, an unsettling shade of gray-blue, swept over her with the kind of lazy assessment usually reserved for square footage and profit margins. He was, objectively, the most irritatingly handsome man she had ever seen. He was also, subjectively, the devil, Mr. Calder. Poppy channeled every ounce of her professional composure, which was currently hanging by a thread. "I wasn't aware you did site visits. I thought you just signed checks and fired people from a distance." A ghost of a smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Miss Vance? I wasn't aware the preservation board sent consultants who look like they're about to cry into their notebook. Rough morning?" She wanted to throw her clipboard at his perfect, smug face. "My morning was fine until I walked into a construction site where my preservation plan was being used as confetti." "Your preservation plan?" he repeated, stepping closer. He smelled like cedar and something expensive. It was deeply unfair. The one that would add 18 months to the timeline and 7 figures to the budget. The one that would save the soul of this building. "The soul doesn't pay the contractors, Miss Vance?" They were standing close now, too close. The foreman had wisely backed away, probably to text his buddies about the show. Poppy tilted her chin up to maintain eye contact. She was 5'5" on a good day. He had to be 6'3". The height difference was, frankly, a design flaw. "Mr. Calder," she said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey, "I understand that concepts like history and beauty might be foreign to someone who builds glass boxes that look like giant toasters. But here in the real world, we have something called the law. And the law says this wall stays." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement? Interest? It was gone before she could name it. "The law," he murmured, "also says that if a building is deemed structurally unsafe, preservation requirements can be waived." He reached past her, his arm brushing her shoulder, and tapped the wall. A chunk of plaster crumbled to the floor. "This wall, Miss Vance, is about as structurally sound as my grandmother's pound cake." "It is not. It is." He held up a crumbling piece. "See? Cake." Poppy wanted to scream. She wanted to stomp her foot. She wanted to win. Because that's what she did. She fought for old buildings and lost causes and things everyone else had given up on. It was practically a personality disorder. She snatched the plaster from his hand. This is superficial damage, she insisted. The core structure is fine. You just want it gone because it's inconvenient for your precious timeline. My precious timeline, he said slowly, is what's keeping this project from going bankrupt and becoming a parking lot. Forgive me if I'm not sentimental about a wall. There's a mural behind this wall. Then take a picture. I'll buy you a frame. Poppy gaped at him. Actual, honest-to-God gaped. You are insufferable. I've been called worse. He tilted his head, studying her like she was a particularly interesting line item. You really care about this, don't you? This wall, this building. Of course I do. It's my job. No. His voice was quiet, probing. It's more than that. The observation landed like a dart. Because he was right, it was more. The Belmont was the last of its kind, a masterpiece of Jazz-age architecture slowly being eaten by developers and neglect. Saving it felt personal, even though Poppy had no connection to it. Or maybe she did. Maybe every beautiful thing she saved felt like a small victory against all the beautiful things her family had lost. She wasn't about to explain that to Leo Calder. What I feel about this building, she said crisply, is irrelevant. What matters is that I am the board-appointed preservation consultant for this project, and per Section 4, Subsection B of the city's Historic Preservation Code, any demolition of original structure requires my written approval, which you don't have. She pulled a folded document from her clipboard and held it up like a golden ticket. It was the city's official appointment letter, complete with embossed seal and the mayor's signature. Leo's eyes scanned it. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the set of his shoulders, a crack in the armor. Impressive, he said finally. You carry that around? For emergencies? I carry everything around for emergencies. I'm a consultant. We're basically preppers with business cards. That almost got a smile. She saw it flicker at the corner of his mouth before he suppressed it. So, he said, stepping back and giving her room to breathe for the first time since he'd appeared. What's your proposal? We save the wall, add 18 months, and I explain to my investors why their returns are now negative? We save the wall, Poppy agreed, and you hire a proper restoration team to uncover the mural. It'll add value. Original artwork? That's a selling point, Mr. Calder. Luxury buyers eat that up. They eat a lot of things. Doesn't mean I have to feed them. Think of it as branding. The Belmont, where history lives. Or, you could put up another floor-to-ceiling window and call it a day, like every other hotel in this city. He crossed his arms. The movement pulled his jacket tight across his shoulders. Poppy absolutely did not notice. You're very sure of yourself, he said. I'm very sure of my job. And what happens when I override you? When I make a call and have you removed? Poppy smiled. It was not a nice smile. Then I call my friends at the Times, and we run a lovely piece about how ruthless developer Leo Calder bulldozed history for profit. I have pictures. I have documents. She patted her clipboard. Everything. The silence stretched between them, thick with tension. The construction site had gone completely quiet around them. Even the pigeons had stopped cooing. Then Leo Calder laughed. It was a low, surprised sound, like he hadn't expected to make it. He ran a hand through his hair. There it was, the gesture, and shook his head. Fine, he said. The wall stays, for now. Poppy blinked. Wait. Really? Really. But, he held up a finger. You're now personally responsible for it. If that mural is a crumbling mess, if it costs more than your estimate, if it delays this project by a single day past the revised timeline you will help me create, I'm holding you accountable. Accountable how? His eyes glittered. I'll think of something. The threat, or promise, she couldn't tell which, hung in the air between them. Poppy's heart was doing something complicated in her chest, a mix of triumph and terror and something else she refused to name. Fine, she said, extending her hand. Partners. He looked at her hand like it might bite. Then he took it. His palm was warm, rough, and huge around hers. The handshake lasted a beat too long. "Partners," he agreed. Then he released her, turned on his heel, and walked back into the shadows without another word. The foreman shrugged at Poppy and followed. Poppy stood alone in the dusty lobby, clutching her clipboard, her heart hammering, her hand tingling. "Oh no," she whispered to the ghosts of the Belmont. "Oh no, no, no." She had won the battle. She had a terrible, horrible, no good feeling she'd just lost the war. The call came at 7:47 the next morning, which meant Poppy had been awake for approximately 4 hours, had already consumed an inadvisable amount of cold brew, and was deep in the trenches of her favorite Saturday morning activity, stress organizing her bookshelf by color, height, and how likely each author was to have been canceled. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. Dorian, her Scottish fold cat, named after Oscar Wilde's Dorian Gray because he was beautiful and morally questionable, lifted his head from her lap and gave her a look that clearly said, "Ignore it, peasant." She looked at the screen. City Historic Preservation Board. Dorian was wrong. You didn't ignore that call. "Poppy Vance," she answered, trying to sound like a person who had not just spent 20 minutes alphabetizing her Bronte sisters. "Miss Vance, this is Geraldine from the chair's office. Please hold for Commissioner Okonkwo." Before Poppy could respond, there was a click, followed by the kind of hold music that sounded like a MIDI file of Vivaldi having a stroke. She stared at Dorian. Dorian stared back, unimpressed. "This is fine," she told him. "This is just a check-in. They probably want to congratulate me on the wall. Maybe there's a plaque involved. Poppy Vance. Saved a wall. Got a handshake." Dorian yawned. The music cut off. "Poppy!" Commissioner Okonkwo's voice boomed through the speaker like she was announcing a parade. "Good news! We've solved the Belmont problem." Poppy's stomach did an uneasy flip. "The wall? Because I handled that." Leo Calder agreed. Yes, we heard about your little showdown. Very dramatic. My assistant pulled the security footage. You know we have cameras in there for insurance purposes?" Poppy did not in fact know that. She made a mental note to never pick her nose on a construction site. "Anyway," the commissioner continued, "the wall was just the beginning. They probably want to congratulate me on the wall. Maybe there's a plaque involved. Poppy Vance. Saved a wall. Got a handshake." Dorian yawned. The music cut off. "Poppy!" Commissioner Okonkwo's voice boomed through the speaker like she was announcing a parade. "Good news! We've solved the Belmont problem." Poppy's stomach did an uneasy flip. "The wall? Because I handled that." Leo Calder agreed. Yes, we heard about your little showdown. Very dramatic. My assistant pulled the security footage. You know we have cameras in there for insurance purposes?" Poppy did not in fact know that. She made a mental note to never pick her nose on a construction site. "Anyway," the commissioner continued, "the wall was just the beginning. The real issue is that you two can't be in a room together without generating enough tension to power a small city, so we're leaning in." "Leaning in?" "We're making you co-chairs of the renovation committee." The room went very quiet. Even Dorian stopped cleaning his paw. "I'm sorry," Poppy said carefully. "I think I misheard you. It sounded like you said you're making me and Leo Calder, the man I had a public screaming match with yesterday, co-chairs." "That's exactly what I said." "That's insane. That's synergy, Poppy." "Commissioner, with all due respect, synergy is a word consultants use to justify bad decisions. This is a bad decision. He's a developer. I'm a preservationist. We're natural enemies, like lions and hyenas, or New Yorkers and people who walk slowly on the sidewalk. And yet, you got him to agree to save the wall. In one meeting. That's more progress than we've made in 6 months. Poppy opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. That was luck. And intimidation. I had a clipboard. Exactly. You're a force of nature, Poppy. And Leo Calder is a force of capitalism. Together, you'll be unstoppable. Or you'll kill each other. Either way, the project moves forward because we're out of time and money, and the mayor wants a ribbon cutting before the election. Poppy gripped her phone so hard she heard the plastic creak. Commissioner, I really think... First co-chair meeting is Monday at 8 a.m. in Leo's office. Dress code is business, but I'm told he's partial to jewel tones. Good luck, Poppy. You're going to be fabulous. The line went dead. Poppy stared at her phone. Then she looked at Dorian. She called me fabulous. That's the last thing you hear before you're sacrificed to a volcano, isn't it? Dorian blinked slowly. He was not a comforting cat. Poppy let her head fall back against the couch. The ceiling of her small Brooklyn apartment had a water stain that looked vaguely like the shape of New Jersey. She'd been meaning to call the landlord about it for 8 months. 8 months. The same amount of time since... No. She wasn't going there. She wasn't going to think about the auction, about that horrible afternoon, about standing in the crowd like a ghost while strangers picked over the bones of her childhood. But the memory came anyway, unbidden and unwelcome, because that's what trauma did. It showed up uninvited, like a cat bringing you a dead mouse at 3 a.m., 8 months ago. The Vance family home was a Greek Revival townhouse in Gramercy Park, 5 stories of pale brick and black shutters that had been in the family for 3 generations. Poppy had grown up there, had scraped her knees on its marble floors, had hidden from her parents' parties in its cavernous library, had kissed her first boyfriend on its wrought iron balcony. She'd also watched it slowly decay as her father's investments, a kind word for gambling debts, ate away at everything her grandparents had built. The auction was held in the house itself, which felt like a particularly cruel joke. Strangers wandered through her living room, poking at furniture, opening cabinets, making offers on chandeliers that had hung there since 1928. Poppy stood in the corner, arms crossed, trying not to cry, while her father paced outside on the sidewalk, too ashamed to come in. Her mother had refused to attend. "I've mourned it already," she'd said, which was somehow worse. The bidding started low. Too low. A developer from New Jersey dropped out early. A couple from Connecticut looked interested until they realized the property didn't come with parking. Then a new voice entered the fray. Calm, controlled, ruthlessly efficient. 2.4 million. Poppy turned. The man who'd spoken was standing near the back, wearing a suit that cost more than her entire grad school education. He was young, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair and pale eyes that swept the room like he was calculating something. He didn't look like the other bidders, the ones with visible egos and bad toupees. He looked like a predator who'd wandered into a petting zoo. 2.5, someone else offered weakly. 2.7. Silence. 2.7 going once, twice. The gavel fell. Leo Calder. She learned his name later when the news articles came out about the mysterious buyer who'd outbid everyone. Nodded once, adjusted his cufflinks, and walked out without a backward glance. Poppy stood frozen as the crowd dispersed, as strangers congratulated themselves on their purchases, as her childhood was parceled out piece by piece. She didn't cry. Not then. She waited until she got home. Her real home now, a shoebox in Brooklyn with a leaking ceiling and a judgmental cat. And then she cried for 3 hours. Her father never recovered. He stopped leaving the house, stopped returning calls, stopped being her dad, and became instead a sad man who watched old movies and pretended the phone wasn't ringing. The creditors kept calling anyway. Poppy blinked, and she was back in her apartment. Dorian now sitting on her chest, staring at her with those huge, worried cat eyes. "I'm fine," she whispered, even though she wasn't. "I'm fine. It's fine. I just have to co-chair a renovation committee with the man who bought my family's house out from under us. No big deal. Totally normal. Happens every day." Dorian meowed. It was a supportive meow, as far as meows went. Poppy grabbed her phone and typed a message to her best friend Sasha, who worked in museum PR and had a talent for talking her off ledges. Poppy had retreated into her work, saving other people's histories because she couldn't save her own. But maybe, just maybe, her mother knew something about Leo Calder that could help, or at least give Poppy ammunition. She saved Sasha's number. Then she pulled up her mother's contact and stared at it. The cursor blinked. Dorian meowed again, louder this time. "Fine," Poppy muttered and pressed call. Her mother answered on the second ring. "Poppy, darling, I was just thinking about you. Did you see the photos from the Guggenheim Gala? Regina's daughter wore chartreuse. At her age, it was a cry for help. Mom, I need information." "Information? About what?" "The developer who bought the house. Leo Calder. What do you know about him?" The silence on the other end was deafening. "Mom? He's dangerous, Poppy." Her mother's voice had lost its socialite lilt, gone flat and serious. "Not in the obvious way. He's not a crook or a cheat. He's worse." "Worse how?" "He gets what he wants. Always. And what he wants, he keeps. Your father tried to fight him, you know, after the auction. Thought he could negotiate, get the house back. Leo Calder didn't even return his calls. He just moved on. Like we didn't exist. Like we were nothing." Poppy's throat tightened. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't—" "Don't be sorry, darling. Be smart. If you have to work with him, work against him. Protect yourself. Don't let him charm you. Don't let him see you care. Men like that, they don't have hearts. They have strategies." The line went dead. Poppy lowered her phone and looked at Dorian. "Well," she said, "that wasn't terrifying at all." Dorian licked his paw. Monday was coming, and Poppy Vance was going to walk into Leo Calder's office wearing black, armed with information and ready for war. She just hoped she survived the first meeting. Monday morning arrived with the kind of humid, overcast weather that made Poppy want to crawl back into bed and pretend she didn't have a job, a conscience, or a meeting with the devil. She wore black. Not just any black, her power black. The black blazer she'd found at a vintage store in Williamsburg that made her shoulders look like she could take on a small army. The black trousers that fit perfectly and made a satisfying swish when she walked. Black boots with enough of a heel to add 2 inches to her height, but not enough to be impractical for navigating construction debris. She looked like a woman who meant business. She felt like a woman who was about to throw up. The Belmont's lobby was even more depressing in the gray morning light. Dust motes danced in the air like tiny ghosts. A pigeon had taken up residence in the mezzanine and was cooing judgmentally at everyone who entered. The frescoed ceiling, which Poppy had spent hours researching, was barely visible through layers of grime and water damage. And there, in the center of it all, stood Leo Calder. He was leaning against the old check-in desk, arms crossed, watching her walk toward him like he had all the time in the world. Today's suit was navy. His tie was the color of a bruise. He looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread titled, "Rich People Who Will Ruin Your Life." "Miss Vance," he said as she approached, "you're early." "I'm punctual." Punctuality is the virtue of those with nothing better to do. And yet, here you are, doing nothing, with me. The corner of his mouth twitched. Touché. Poppy stopped a few feet away, close enough to be professional, far enough to maintain the moral high ground. She was acutely aware of her mother's warning. Don't let him charm you. Don't let him see you care. "I assume you have an agenda?" she asked, pulling out her own clipboard. "Or did you just want to admire the decay?" Leo pushed off the desk and walked toward her. He moved like someone who'd never been told to get out of the way, like the world naturally parted for him. "I have a proposal," he said, handing her a thick stack of bound papers. "Full architectural plans for the renovation, budget estimates, timeline projections, everything the board asked for." Poppy took the document and started flipping through it. Page 1. Demolish the non-original additions. Reasonable. Page 2. Update the electrical and plumbing. Necessary. Page 3. Remove the mezzanine level to create a grander lobby. She stopped. Page 4. Gut the east wing entirely to make room for a modern glass atrium. Page 5. Replace all original windows with energy-efficient replicas. Page 6. Remove the historic ballroom's hand-carved moldings to streamline the aesthetic. Page 7. This is a hatchet job, she said flatly, looking up at him. You're not renovating the Belmont, you're lobotomizing it. Leo's expression didn't change. I'm making it functional, profitable, sustainable. The board wants a hotel that actually operates, not a museum that occasionally rents rooms. The board hired me to preserve the historical integrity of this building. This, she waved the document, is the opposite of that. It's a starting point. Negotiation is about compromise, Miss Vance. Compromise is when both sides give something up. This is you taking everything and leaving me with a commemorative plaque. He tilted his head, studying her with those pale eyes. You're very dramatic for someone so small. I'm 5'5". That's average. Average for a Victorian orphan, maybe? Poppy's grip tightened on the document. She wanted to throw it at his head. She wanted to set it on fire. She wanted to win. Fine, she said, her voice cool and controlled. You want to negotiate? Let's negotiate. She flipped to page 4 and held it up. The East Wing. You want to gut it for a glass atrium. But the East Wing contains the original 1928 Palm Court, one of the only remaining examples of Art Deco hotel design in the city. The ceiling alone, hand-painted gold leaf, commissioned from a student of Louis Comfort Tiffany, is worth more than your entire atrium budget. Leo's eyebrows rose slightly. Tiffany? Apprentice. But yes, the records are in the city archives. I have copies. She flipped to page 5. The windows. You want energy-efficient replicas, but the original windows are leaded glass, custom-made for the building. They're not just windows. They're art. Restoring them costs more upfront, but adds significantly to the property's value as a landmark. Luxury travelers don't want efficient. They want authentic. Page 6. The ballroom moldings. Hand-carved by Italian artisans who were imported specifically for this project. There are photographs of them at work in the New York Times archives from 1928. Removing them doesn't streamline the aesthetic. It destroys the aesthetic. She flipped faster now, hitting each point with the precision of a surgeon. Page 8. The original Otis elevators with their wrought iron cages. Page 11. The terrazzo flooring in the lobby. Page 14. The marble columns imported from Siena. By the time she finished, Leo was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't admiration. It was something in between, something sharp and focused. You've done your homework, he said. I've done my job. You've done more than that. He stepped closer, and Poppy had to fight the urge to step back. You've spent hours in archives. You've tracked down original permits and photographs. You've built a case against me that would hold up in court. That's literally my job description. No. His voice was quiet, probing. Your job description is to advise on preservation. This. He gestured at the document in her hands, now covered in her furious marginalia. This is a crusade. Poppy's heart hammered. I take my work seriously. I can see that. Another step closer. She could smell the cedar and expensive cologne now, could see the faint stubble along his jaw. What I don't understand is why. It's called having professional standards. Most consultants have professional standards. They don't arrive at a Monday morning meeting ready for war. His eyes searched her face. This is personal for you, isn't it? The Belmont, old buildings, history. Poppy's throat tightened. She thought of her mother's voice on the phone. Don't let him see you care. It's not personal, she lied. It's principle. Principles come from somewhere. He was close enough now that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. What's your somewhere, Poppy? The use of her first name hit her like a slap. Intimate, probing, dangerous. My somewhere, she said, forcing her voice to stay level, is none of your business. What is your business is this building. And unless you want me to take this proposal to the board with a full breakdown of every historical violation it contains, I suggest we start over. She held his gaze, refused to blink, refused to back down. For a long, tense moment, neither of them moved. Then Leo smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who'd just discovered his prey had teeth. Fine, he said. We'll start over, but on one condition. What condition? Tell me about the house. Poppy's blood went cold. What house? The one you keep flashing to when you look at me. The one that makes your eyes go dark and your jaw tighten. He tilted his head. I've seen that look before. It's the look of someone who lost something they can't get back. Poppy wanted to deny it, wanted to tell him he was imagining things, projecting, being a creepy billionaire with too much time on his hands. But the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. And he knew it. I don't know what you're talking about, she managed. Liar. The word was soft, almost gentle. It made her want to scream. We're done here, she said, stepping back and tucking the mangled proposal under her arm. I'll have a counter-proposal to you by Friday, one that actually respects this building. In the meantime, I suggest you familiarize yourself with the Landmarks Preservation Commission's guidelines. Page 12 is particularly relevant to your atrium fantasy. She turned and walked toward the door, heart pounding, hands shaking. Poppy! She stopped, didn't turn around. I'll find out eventually. I always do. She walked out without answering, without giving him the satisfaction. But his words followed her all the way to the subway, echoing in her head like a promise or a threat. I always do. The site inspection was scheduled for Wednesday at 2 p.m., which meant Poppy had exactly 48 hours to recover from Monday's verbal bloodbath and prepare herself for another round. 48 hours was not enough. She'd spent Tuesday in the municipal archives, pulling permits, cross-referencing dates, building her counter-proposal like a general preparing for siege. By midnight, she had a 23-page document that detailed exactly how Leo Calder could have his profitable hotel and keep the building's soul intact. It was brilliant. It was thorough. It was the kind of work that usually got her praised by boards and ignored by developers. She'd also spent approximately 6 of those 48 hours thinking about the way he'd said her name. Poppy. Like he had a right to it, like he'd been saving it. This was, she decided, a problem. You're overthinking, Sasha had said during their 11 p.m. FaceTime call, while simultaneously applying a face mask and eating cheese puffs. He's trying to get in your head. Don't let him. He's already in my head. He's redecorating, putting up shelves. Then evict him. You're good at that. You evicted that guy from Connecticut who kept leaving his toothbrush at your apartment? That was different. That guy was just clueless. Leo Calder is... She'd stopped, unable to find the right word. Satan in a nice suit? Sasha offered. Yes, exactly. Satan in a nice suit. Then treat him like Satan. Don't make deals, don't trust him, and definitely don't let him see you sweat. Easy for Sasha to say. Sasha wasn't the one walking into a dusty death trap with a man who looked at her like she was a puzzle he was determined to solve. Wednesday arrived with actual sunshine, which felt like a cosmic joke. The Belmont's ballroom should have been inspected in fog and gloom, with maybe some distant thunder for atmosphere. Instead, golden light streamed through the tall, grimy windows, illuminating every floating dust particle like tiny stars. Leo was already there when she arrived, standing in the center of the ballroom, hands in his pockets, staring up at the ceiling. Today's suit was charcoal, no tie. His shirt was open at the collar, revealing a hint of collarbone that Poppy absolutely did not notice. "You're early again," she said, her voice echoing in the empty space. "I live here now. Didn't you hear? The pigeons and I are roommates." Poppy snorted before she could stop herself. "The gray one by the window is named Gerald. He complains about the HOA." Leo turned, and there it was again. That almost smile, the one he kept trying to hide. "You've named the pigeons." "I've named a pigeon. The others are feral and undeserving of my attention." He gestured around the ballroom. "What about this one? Does this space deserve your attention?" It was a fair question. The ballroom was magnificent, even in decay. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, covered in ornate plasterwork that had once been painted in gold and cream. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, their prisms dull with dust but still catching the light. The marble floor, actual Carrara marble, Poppy had confirmed, stretched out in a geometric pattern that led the eye toward a stage where orchestras had once played for dancing until dawn. "It deserves more than attention," she said softly. "It deserves resurrection." Leo was quiet for a moment. Then he walked toward the nearest wall and ran his hand along the carved molding. "This is hand done?" "Everything is hand done. 1928, remember? They didn't have CNC machines and contractors from New Jersey. They had craftsmen. Immigrants mostly, Italians, Germans, Irish, who spent years learning their trade. This molding? That's acanthus leaves, symbol of immortality. They carved it into everything because they believed beauty should last forever." Naive. Hopeful. There's a difference. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Poppy felt it like a physical thing, a shift in the air between them, a charge that hadn't been there before. "You really believe that," he said. "That beauty matters. That history matters." "I don't just believe it. I know it. Look around you, Leo. This room has hosted galas and weddings and secret rendezvous. It's watched people fall in love and fall apart. It's seen the best and worst of humanity, and it's still standing. That's not nothing. That's—" She stopped, suddenly aware that she was rambling, that she'd used his first name, that he was looking at her like she was the most interesting thing in the room. "That's what?" he prompted. "That's why I do this," she finished quietly. "Not for the tax credits or the historic registers. For the stories. For the people who came before and the people who will come after. For the chance to add something beautiful to the world instead of just taking from it." The silence that followed was thick with something Poppy couldn't name. The dust continued its lazy dance in the sunlight. Somewhere in the distance, Gerald the pigeon cooed. Then the light shifted. A cloud must have moved, because suddenly the sun was angling through a different window, hitting the chandeliers at exactly the right angle to send prisms of color scattering across the floor. Red and blue and gold danced over the marble, over the walls, over Leo's face. He looked almost ethereal in the colored light, almost soft, almost human. "Poppy," he said, and this time her name sounded different. Not a challenge, not a probe, just her name. "Yeah?" "This room. If we save it, if we do this right, what does it become?" She blinked. "You're asking me?" "I'm asking you." "Weddings, probably. Galas. Maybe a concert series if the acoustics work. It could be." She gestured vaguely, overwhelmed by the possibilities. "It could be magic again." Leo looked around the room, really looked this time, and Poppy saw something shift in his expression. Not surrender. Leo Calder didn't surrender, but curiosity, interest. The same sharp focus he'd turned on her, now aimed at the space around them. "The ceiling," he said slowly. "Can it be saved?" "The plaster?" "Yes, it needs reinforcement, but the structure is sound. The chandeliers need cleaning and rewiring, but the crystals are original. The floor needs refinishing, not replacement. It's all doable. It's just expensive." "Expensive," she agreed, "but less expensive than gutting it and starting over. And the return on investment—" "Stop." She froze. "What?" He was looking at her again, that unreadable expression back in place. "Stop pitching me. I'm not a client. I'm not a board member. I'm just—" He paused, seeming to search for the right word. "I'm just asking." Poppy didn't know what to do with that. Didn't know what to do with this version of Leo Calder, the one who stood in colored light and asked questions without an agenda. Or maybe there was always an agenda. Maybe this was just a new tactic. But standing there, surrounded by a century of beauty and dust and possibility, she found it hard to care. "Okay," she said softly. "Then I'll tell you. This room, if we do it right, becomes a place where people make memories, where they fall in love and celebrate anniversaries and dance with their children. It becomes alive again, not preserved in amber, but living, breathing, evolving. And that matters to you. More than almost anything." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, sharply, and turned away. "Show me the rest." Poppy blinked. "What?" "The rest of the building. Show me what else you'd save. What else matters." "You're actually listening?" "Don't get used to it." But there was something in his voice, a roughness, an edge, that hadn't been there before. Like she'd gotten under his skin somehow. Like this old, dusty building was working its magic on both of them. Poppy led him through the rest of the Belmont, pointing out details he'd never noticed. The original mail chutes with their brass fittings. The telephone exchange room, still intact, with its switchboard and operator stations. The service staircase, plain but perfect, with iron railings worn smooth by generations of hands. Leo asked questions. Real questions, not the kind designed to trip her up. He wanted to know why things were built the way they were, what they'd been used for, who'd used them. He touched things, walls, railings, doorknobs, like he was trying to feel the history through his fingertips. By the time they reached the roof, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The city spread out below them, glittering and alive. "This view," Leo said quietly. "It's why I wanted this building." Poppy stood beside him at the edge, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "For the skyline?" "For the perspective." He gestured at the city below. "Down there, everything is competition. Everyone's trying to take something from someone else. Up here, it's just—" He stopped, seeming to catch himself. "Never mind. It's stupid." "It's not stupid." He looked at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. "I get it," she continued. "Up here, you can see how it all fits together. The old and the new, the beautiful and the ugly. It's not about winning. It's about being part of something bigger," he finished. They stood there in the fading light, the city humming below them, and Poppy felt the last of her defenses crack. This man, this ruthless, infuriating, beautiful man, understood. Not everything, maybe. Not the deep stuff, the personal stuff, the stuff that kept her up at night. But this, the building, the need to create something that lasted, he understood. And that was terrifying. "We should go," she said, stepping back. "It's getting dark." "Poppy." She stopped, didn't turn around. "Thank you for showing me." She nodded once, sharply, and headed for the stairwell without looking back. But she felt his gaze on her the whole way down. The discovery happened on Thursday afternoon, entirely by accident, in the way all the best and worst discoveries do. Poppy had returned to the Belmont to take additional measurements of the Palm Court ceiling. The Tiffany apprentice situation required precise documentation if she was going to make her case for preservation, when she noticed something odd in the site office. The site office was a temporary trailer wedged between the hotel's service entrance and a dumpster that smelled like regret. It was filled with rolled-up blueprints, coffee cups in various stages of decay, and a whiteboard covered in hieroglyphics that Poppy assumed were construction-related but could also have been ancient Sumerian. She was there because the site foreman, the same one from the wall incident, had promised her access to the original structural surveys. What she found instead was a stack of blueprints shoved behind a filing cabinet, clearly labeled Original Belmont Architectural Drawings, 1928. "These aren't supposed to be here," she murmured, pulling them out. According to the official record, the original blueprints had been lost in a basement flood in the 1970s. That's what Leo's proposal had claimed. That's why his team had submitted new, modern designs for the structural elements, because the originals were supposedly illegible. But these weren't illegible. They were pristine, carefully rolled, professionally stored, and absolutely readable. Poppy unrolled one on the nearest table. The Palm Court. Every detail, every dimension, every hand-drawn notation about the gold leaf and the lighting and the custom fixtures. It was all here. All of it. Her hands started to shake. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't negligence. Someone had deliberately hidden these blueprints to justify gutting the original design, and that someone worked for Leo Calder. She checked the dates on the folder. The blueprints had been logged into the project inventory 6 months ago, 6 months before Leo's proposal claimed they were lost. 6 months of lying. 6 months of planning to destroy history while pretending they had no choice. Poppy rolled the blueprints carefully, tucked them under her arm, and walked out of the site office without saying a word to anyone. She was going to Leo Calder's office, and she was going to enjoy watching him explain this. Calder Development occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in Hudson Yards, because, of course it did. The building was all sharp angles and reflective surfaces, designed to look like the future, even though it would probably be outdated in 10 years. The lobby had a living wall, actual plants growing on the interior, which felt aggressively on-brand. Poppy took the elevator to the 47th floor, clutching the blueprints like a weapon. The receptionist, a human-shaped person with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, tried to make her wait. "Mr. Calder is in a meeting." "Cancel it." "I really can't." Poppy walked past her. The office beyond was exactly what she'd expected. Sleek, minimalist, expensive. Floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the river. Furniture that looked uncomfortable, but probably cost more than her apartment. Art on the walls that she vaguely recognized from auction catalogs. The kind of art you bought because someone told you it was important, not because you actually liked it. Leo was standing by the window, phone pressed to his ear, back to the door. He was saying something about zoning variances in a tone that suggested the person on the other end was an idiot. He turned when Poppy entered, eyebrows rising. He held up one finger. Wait, but Poppy was done waiting. She crossed the room, unrolled the blueprints on his pristine glass desk, and stood there with her arms crossed, waiting. Leo's eyes dropped to the drawings. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or calculation, before he smoothly ended his call. "I'll call you back." He hung up and set the phone down. "Poppy, this is unexpected. These are the original 1928 blueprints for the Belmont." "I can see that." "Your proposal claimed they were lost, damaged beyond use. You used that claim to justify your modern redesign?" Leo's expression didn't change. "I'm aware." "Aware?" Poppy's voice rose. Leo, these have been in your site office for 6 months. 6 months of lying to the board, to me, to everyone about what was possible. You hid them, on purpose. He walked around the desk, close enough that she had to tilt her head to maintain eye contact. I didn't hide them. My team prioritized current documentation over historical reference. It's not a conspiracy, it's efficiency. Efficiency. Poppy laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's your answer? You lost 100-year-old building's original plans because of efficiency? I didn't lose them. They were misplaced. There's a difference. The difference is intent, Leo, and I don't believe for a second that you didn't know exactly where they were. He was quiet for a moment, studying her with those pale eyes. Then he moved past her, toward the window, giving her his back. You're right, he said quietly. I knew. Poppy's breath caught. What? I knew they were there. I chose not to use them. He turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw something other than confidence in his expression. Something almost like shame. The modern design is better, Poppy. More efficient, more profitable. The original plans are beautiful, but they're also impractical. The room layouts don't work for modern hospitality. The mechanical systems are in the wrong places. Saving the past sometimes means sacrificing the future. Saving the past is the future, Poppy shot back. Without history, without context, what are we even building? Glass boxes that all look the same? Hotels that could be anywhere? The Belmont is special because of what it is, not what you could turn it into. Special is subjective. Profit is not. Since when do you care about anything except profit? The words hung in the air between them, sharper than she'd intended. Leo's jaw tightened. You think you know me? You think I'm just some soulless developer who only sees dollar signs? I think you're a man who hides historical documents to get his way. I think you're a man who treats the past like an obstacle instead of an inheritance. I think... She stopped, breathing hard. Go on. I think you don't understand what it's like to lose something you can't get back, to watch everything your family built get sold off piece by piece while strangers pick through it like vultures, to have the place you grew up, the only place that ever felt like home, turned into someone else's investment property. Her voice cracked. You don't know what that's like. You probably never will. The silence that followed was deafening. When Leo spoke, his voice was soft, dangerously soft. You're right, he said. I don't know what that's like. Poppy blinked, thrown by the admission. I don't know what it's like to lose a family home because I never had one. I grew up in foster care, Poppy. 7 different homes by the time I was 12. I never had a room of my own, let alone a house to lose. The closest thing I had to history was a garbage bag with my name written on it in permanent marker. Poppy felt the air leave her lungs. So when you stand there and talk about inheritance and legacy and all the things you've lost, just remember, some of us never had anything to lose in the first place. Some of us had to build everything from nothing. And, yeah, maybe I'm ruthless. Maybe I prioritize profit over preservation. But at least I'm not clinging to a past that's never coming back. At least I'm not wasting my life fighting for things that are already gone. He stepped closer, and this time Poppy couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Clinging to the past, he said quietly, is a luxury, Poppy. It's something people with stable childhoods and family homes and memories worth preserving get to do. The rest of us, we build forward because there's nothing behind us worth saving. Poppy's eyes burned. She blinked rapidly, refusing to cry in front of him, refusing to give him that satisfaction. That's not fair, she whispered. No, it's not. He held her gaze. But it's true. They stood there, inches apart, the blueprints forgotten on the desk between them. Poppy could see the lines of tension in his face, the walls he'd built just as carefully as she'd built hers. could see the boy he'd been, the one with no home and no history and no one to fight for him. And despite everything, despite the lies and the manipulation and the ruthless efficiency, she felt something crack inside her chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But understanding. The blueprints, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I need them. For the record. Leo nodded once. Take them. And the modern design? The atrium? The gutted wings? Those are still on the table. Then we're still on opposite sides. Probably. A ghost of a smile. But maybe now you understand why. Poppy gathered the blueprints, rolling them carefully, buying herself time to compose her face, her voice, her heart. At the door, she paused. Leo? Yes? I'm sorry. About your childhood. About all of it. He didn't answer. Didn't move. She left without looking back. But his words followed her all the way home, echoing in her head alongside the image of a boy with a garbage bag and no place to call his own. Clinging to the past is a luxury. Maybe he was right. Maybe she'd been luxuriating in grief while other people were just trying to survive. Maybe, just maybe, she'd been wrong about him. The committee meeting was held in the city's historic landmarks office, a building that looked like someone had tried to make government architecture charming and then given up halfway through. The room was all dark wood and fluorescent lighting, with a long conference table that had definitely witnessed some soul-crushing meetings in its time. Poppy arrived 20 minutes early, a habit born of anxiety and her mother's relentless conditioning. She'd spent the weekend avoiding Leo's words, avoiding her own thoughts, avoiding the uncomfortable realization that maybe, just maybe, she'd been fighting the wrong enemy. But Monday morning had arrived anyway, as Monday mornings do, and here she was, clutching her coffee like a talisman, waiting for the inevitable. The committee filed in slowly. Representatives from the Landmarks Commission, the City Planning Department, the Mayor's Office, and a rotating cast of concerned citizens who'd been fighting about the Belmont for so long they'd forgotten what started the fight. Geraldine from the chair's office was there, taking notes on a tablet. Commissioner Okonkwo swept in like she was hosting a talk show, greeting everyone by name and dispensing compliments like candy. And then Leo walked in. He was in full armor today. Black suit, white shirt, silver tie that caught the fluorescent light. His face was carefully blank, giving nothing away. He took a seat across from Poppy, nodded once in her direction, and opened his leather portfolio like he was preparing for a deposition. Poppy's stomach did something complicated. All right, everyone. Commissioner Okonkwo clapped her hands together. Let's get started. We have a lot to cover and not a lot of time. The Belmont renovation has been stalled for. She checked her notes. Long enough. Today, we need concrete proposals, actionable timelines, and most importantly, agreement. She looked pointedly at Poppy and Leo. Poppy felt the weight of the room's attention, felt Leo's gaze like a physical thing. Miss Vance, the commissioner continued, you've submitted a counter-proposal. Walk us through it. Poppy stood, distributing copies of her document. She'd worked on it all weekend, incorporating everything she'd learned from the blueprints, every historical detail, every cost-effective preservation strategy she could find. It was good work. Solid work. The kind of work that usually made her proud. But as she talked, as she explained about the Tiffany apprentice and the hand-carved moldings and the original Otis elevators, she kept glancing at Leo. Kept waiting for him to interrupt, to argue, to dismantle her points with his ruthless efficiency. He didn't. He just sat there, listening, his expression unreadable. When she finished, there was a smattering of applause from the preservation-minded members. Commissioner Okonkwo nodded thoughtfully. Thank you, Miss Vance. That's thorough. She turned to Leo. Mr. Calder? Your response? Leo stood slowly, deliberately. He didn't look at his notes. He looked at Poppy. "Ms. Vance's proposal is beautiful," he said, and the word hung in the air like a challenge. "It's also financially impossible." Poppy's jaw tightened. "It's not impossible. The numbers work. I had an accountant review them." "Your accountant," Leo said smoothly, "didn't factor in the opportunity cost. Every month this project delays is a month of lost revenue. Every dollar spent on restoration is a dollar not spent on modernization. The Belmont can be a museum, or it can be a hotel. It can't be both." "It can be both. That's literally my proposal." "Your proposal assumes that luxury travelers care about authenticity. They don't. They care about comfort, convenience, and status. Authenticity is a marketing buzzword, not a business model." Poppy felt her temper rising. "So your solution is to strip away everything that makes the building unique and replace it with, what? Another glass atrium? Another rooftop bar? Another hotel that could be anywhere in the world?" "Yes." Leo's voice was calm, controlled. "Because anywhere in the world is exactly where our guests come from. They don't want New York in 1928. They want New York now, the city that never sleeps, the capital of capitalism, the place where history is something you build, not something you preserve." That's the most cynical thing I've ever heard. That's the most realistic thing you've ever heard. The room was very quiet now. Poppy could feel the committee members watching them like they were at a tennis match. "Realistic," she repeated, her voice rising. "You want to talk about realistic? Realistic is understanding that without history, without context, this city is just another collection of glass boxes. Realistic is knowing that people come here because of what New York is, not what some developer wants to turn it into. Realistic, Leo cut her off, is knowing that your precious history was built by people who would have been thrilled to see it replaced with something better. You think the artisans who carved those moldings wanted them to last forever? They wanted to get paid. They wanted to feed their families. They wanted to build something and move on to the next thing. That's what New York is. That's what it's always been. Constant change, constant reinvention, constant destruction. Poppy was on her feet now, hands shaking. "That's what you do, Leo. You destroy things. You tear down what other people built and call it progress. You take beautiful, meaningful places and turn them into investments. You're a vulture, a soulless vulture picking at the bones of a city that used to have a soul." The words landed like bombs. Leo's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went cold, deadly cold. "And you," he said quietly, "are a rich girl playing preservationist because you lost your family's house and can't handle it. Your history isn't about the Belmont. It's about you. It's about nostalgia for a world that was never as good as you remember. A world that, by the way, forgot people like me existed. People with no history, no legacy, no beautiful old houses to mourn." Poppy felt like she'd been punched. That's exactly what it is." He stepped closer, and for a moment they were back in his office, inches apart, the air between them crackling with tension. "You're not saving the Belmont. You're saving yourself. You're trying to rebuild something you lost by preserving something you found. But it doesn't work that way, Poppy. You can't fill a hole in your heart with other people's history." The room was dead silent. Poppy could hear her own heartbeat, could see the flicker of something in Leo's eyes. Regret, maybe, or recognition that he'd gone too far. Commissioner Okonkwo cleared her throat. "Well," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "that was illuminating." Poppy sank back into her chair, suddenly aware that everyone was staring, that she'd just had her deepest wound exposed in front of strangers, that Leo Calder, the man she'd been fighting for weeks, had seen right through her. The commissioner stood, her expression hardening. Here's the situation, folks. The Belmont project has been stalled for 18 months. We're out of time, out of patience, and out of funding alternatives. If you two cannot find a way to work together, if you cannot produce a unified proposal that addresses both preservation and profitability, the city will withdraw its support entirely, and the Belmont will be sold to the highest bidder with no preservation requirements attached. She looked at Poppy, then at Leo. You have 2 weeks, 14 days to figure out how to be adults. If you can't, the Belmont becomes someone else's problem, and that someone else will almost certainly turn it into a parking lot. She gathered her papers. This meeting is adjourned. The room emptied quickly, committee members practically fleeing the tension. Poppy sat frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. Leo was still there, still watching her. Poppy! Don't. Her voice was barely a whisper. Just don't. The conference room had a strange echo once everyone left. Poppy sat frozen in her chair, staring at the empty space where Commissioner Okonkwo had delivered her ultimatum. 2 weeks, 14 days to figure out how to be adults. 14 days to bridge a gap that felt as wide as the Hudson River. Her hands were still shaking. She should leave. She should gather her things and walk out and go home and call Sasha and eat ice cream and pretend this afternoon never happened. That was the smart play. That was the self-preservation play. But her legs wouldn't move. The door clicked shut. She heard footsteps approaching, then the scrape of a chair being pulled out across from her. Leo sat down, close enough to see but far enough to give her space. His tie was loosened. His hair, usually so perfectly arranged, had a piece falling across his forehead. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. I meant what I said, Leo finally said, his voice quiet. About the house. About what you're really fighting for. Poppy's throat tightened. If you're here to gloat... I'm not. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, those pale eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. I'm asking, really asking, why does it matter so much? Not the Belmont, the house, your family's house. Why can't you let it go? Poppy wanted to deflect, wanted to make a joke, change the subject, rebuild the walls he'd so thoroughly demolished. But she was so tired, so desperately, achingly tired of carrying this alone. You really want to know? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I really want to know. She took a breath, let it out slowly. It wasn't the house, she said. I mean, it was, but it wasn't. It was what it represented. My grandfather built that house, bought it in 1958 when Gramercy Park was still affordable for a self-made man. He came from nothing, literally nothing, immigrated here with a suitcase and a dream. And he built something, a business, a family, a home that would last for generations. Leo was very still, listening. My father inherited all of it, the house, the business, the legacy, and she stopped, swallowing hard. He couldn't hold it together. Bad investments, worse gambles. He thought he could multiply what his father built, but he just lost it, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. The auction, Leo said softly. The auction. Poppy nodded, not trusting her voice. I stood there and watched strangers pick through my grandmother's china, watched them haggle over furniture I'd sat on my whole life, watched them carry away boxes of memories like they were nothing. And when the house itself sold, when your company bought it, my father just broke. She looked up at him, and for the first time, let him see the full weight of it. He stopped being my dad after that, stopped being anything except a sad man in an apartment watching old movies and pretending the phone wasn't ringing. My mother retreated into her luncheons and her charity galas. And She laughed, but it was hollow. I threw myself into saving other people's history because I couldn't save my own. The silence that followed was different from before. Not the stunned silence of their public fight, but something quieter, more intimate. "I'm sorry," Leo said. It was so simple, so unexpected. Poppy blinked at him. For what? Buying the house? For not understanding, for assuming it was just nostalgia, for... He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she was starting to recognize as his tell, for being an asshole about it. "You were right about some of it," she admitted. "About me fighting my own battles through other people's buildings, about clinging to the past. I don't know how to let go. I don't know who I am without the fight." "Then don't let go." His voice was rough. "Fight, but fight for the right reasons. Fight for the Belmont because it deserves saving, not because it's a stand-in for everything you lost." Poppy stared at him. This man, this ruthless, calculating, infuriating man, had just seen through to the very core of her, and instead of using it as a weapon, he'd offered her a way forward. "Why do you care?" she asked. "Why does any of this matter to you?" Leo was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was stripped of all its usual armor. "Because I recognize it," he said. "The hunger, the need to prove something, the fear that if you stop fighting, you'll disappear. I've been running from that my whole life, building things, acquiring things, trying to leave a mark because I came into this world with nothing and no one, no history, no legacy, no proof that I mattered." He met her eyes. "When I bought your family's house, I didn't know the story behind it. I just saw an asset, a beautiful property with potential. But now," he shook his head, "now I see what I took. And I'm sorry, Poppy. I'm sorry I was part of that loss." Poppy felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. "You didn't know," she whispered. "That doesn't make it better." "No, but it makes it..." She stopped, searching for the right word. "It makes it human." They sat there in the empty conference room, the weight of their shared vulnerability pressing down on them. Two people who'd spent their whole lives building walls, finally seeing each other through the cracks. "We have 2 weeks," Leo said eventually. 14 days to figure out how to save this building without killing each other. Can we do it?" He almost smiled. "I don't know, but I'd like to try, if you would." Poppy looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected. Not the ruthless developer, not the soulless Vulture. Just a man, a complicated, damaged, surprisingly human man. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's try." Leo nodded once. Then he stood, extending his hand. She took it. His palm was warm, rough, familiar now. The handshake lasted a beat too long, just like the first time. But this time, neither of them let go first. The compromise arrived via email at 7 a.m. the next morning, sent from Commissioner Okonkwo's personal account with a subject line that read simply, "Fight Club." Poppy read it 3 times, waiting for the part where it became a joke. It was not a joke. To Poppy Vance, Leo Calder. From Commissioner Okonkwo. Subject: Fight Club. You have 3 weeks, not 2. 3. I called in favors. Here's the deal. You will present a unified proposal to the full board on June 15th. Not separate proposals, not competing visions. One proposal that you have developed together. If you fail, the Belmont project is dead. No extensions, no appeals. Dead. If you succeed, I will personally champion your proposal through every level of city government. You're welcome. Commissioner O. P.S. I've booked you a workspace at the Belmont itself. Figured the building could use some witnesses to its own salvation. Or destruction. Either way, the pigeons will have stories. Poppy stared at her phone. 3 weeks. Together. In the Belmont. With Leo Calder. Dorian, sensing her existential dread, climbed onto her chest and sat there, staring at her with those huge, judgmental cat eyes. "I know," Poppy whispered. "I know." Her phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. "Unknown? You got the email?" "Poppy, who is this?" "Unknown. Leo, you have my number now. Try not to abuse it." "Poppy, I don't even know how you got mine." "Leo, I have resources." "Poppy, that's not creepy at all." Leo, the Belmont, 9 a.m. Bring coffee and an open mind. Poppy, I bring neither of those things before 10. Leo, 10 it is. Don't be late. Poppy stared at the messages, then at Dorian, then back at the messages. "He's funny now," she told the cat. "Since when is he funny?" Dorian blinked slowly. This was not a helpful response. The Belmont at 10 a.m. was somehow even more depressing than the Belmont at 2 p.m. Morning light had a way of highlighting decay, illuminating every water stain and crumbling corner with cruel precision. Poppy walked through the lobby, coffee in each hand. She'd brought 2, because she was a professional, damn it, and found Leo already there. He was standing in front of the palm court's gold leaf ceiling, looking up at it with an expression she couldn't read. "You're early," she said, handing him a cup. He took it without looking away from the ceiling. "I couldn't sleep." "Me neither." She stood beside him, also looking up. "It's the deadline, not the ceiling." "I know." They stood there in silence, drinking their coffee, staring at a 100-year-old masterpiece that might or might not survive the next 3 weeks. "I've been thinking," Leo finally said. "Dangerous." He almost smiled. "About what you said. About history being more than nostalgia. About the people who built this place and what they'd want." "And?" "And I don't have an answer, but I'm willing to find one. With you." Poppy turned to look at him. In the morning light, with his guard down and his hair still slightly disheveled, he looked almost approachable. "That's surprisingly not terrible," she said. High praise from Poppy Vance. "Don't get used to it." He did smile then, a real smile, and Poppy felt something dangerous flutter in her chest. "Come on," she said, heading toward the old ballroom. "I have ideas. You have a checkbook. Let's see if we can make them play nice together." The old billiards room was tucked away on the second floor, accessible via a service staircase that smelled like mothballs and regret. It was smaller than the ballroom, cozier, with a massive slate table in the center that had definitely seen better decades. The felt was torn, the pockets were empty, but the light from the windows was soft and golden, and the room had the feeling of forgotten secrets. Poppy spread her blueprints across the table. Leo added his. Together, they created a patchwork of past and future, ambition and preservation. "Okay," she said, pointing at the palm court. "This is the heart of the building. If we lose this, we lose everything. The gold leaf, the Tiffany connection, the original layout. It's all here." Leo studied the blueprint, his brow furrowed. "The structural supports are in the wrong places. If we keep the original configuration, we lose 30% of the square footage." Square footage isn't everything. It is when you're trying to turn a profit. Then we get creative. Poppy pulled out a separate sketch she'd been working on. What if we keep the original footprint but reconfigure the flow? The palm court becomes a members-only lounge. High-end clientele, limited access, premium pricing. The mystique adds value. People pay for exclusivity. Leo's eyes scanned her sketch. And the rest of the space? Guest rooms in the wings, obviously, but we preserve the original layouts where possible. The rooms will be smaller, but we market them as authentic. Original proportions, original details, original charm. Luxury travelers don't want cookie cutter. They want stories. Stories don't pay the mortgage. No, but they justify the room rate. She pulled out another page, this one covered in market research. I've been crunching numbers. Comparable historic hotels in Europe charge 40% more than modern luxury properties. The demand is there. You just have to sell it right. Leo looked at her research, then at her sketches, then at her. You did all this? Since yesterday? I don't sleep well when I'm stressed. It's a superpower and a curse. He shook his head slowly. You're remarkable, you know that? Poppy felt her face warm. I'm thorough. There's a difference. No, there's not. The moment hung between them, charged with something neither of them was ready to name. Then Leo turned back to the blueprints, clearing his throat. All right, show me the rest. Sell me on your vision. Poppy spent the next hour walking him through every detail, the hand-carved moldings, the original fixtures, the stories hidden in every corner. And for the first time, Leo didn't argue. He asked questions, genuine questions, the kind that showed he was actually listening. What about the mechanical systems? Can we upgrade without destroying the structure? Yes. There's a service corridor behind the East Wing that was designed for exactly that. The original architects thought of everything. The windows. Can we make them energy efficient without replacing them? Custom inserts. They fit inside the existing frames, invisible from the outside. It's been done in Paris. I have case studies. The elevators. The originals are beautiful but slow. Guests won't wait. We keep them for aesthetic, install a modern service elevator in the back. The original cars become a VIP experience, private, exclusive, worth the wait. By the time they finished, the sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the billiards room. Poppy's voice was hoarse. Leo's tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, his hair a mess. They'd ordered takeout at some point. Poppy couldn't remember when, and the remnants of mediocre Chinese food sat between them on the table, mixing with blueprints and sketches and pages of notes. This could work, Leo said quietly, staring at their combined work. This could actually work. Don't sound so surprised. He looked up at her, and there it was again. That intensity, that focus, but softened now by something that looked almost like wonder. I've never worked with anyone like you, he said. Most people just agree with me, or they fight me. But you meet me where I am, and then you pull me somewhere else. Somewhere better. Poppy's heart hammered. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. From the man who never observes anything except profit margins. Maybe you're changing me. The words hung in the air, dangerous and thrilling. Poppy looked away, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how easy it would be to reach out and touch him. We should do this again, she said, her voice slightly unsteady. Tomorrow. Same time. We have 3 weeks to turn this into a real proposal. Tomorrow, Leo agreed. I'll bring better food. The bar is low. That sesame chicken was criminal. He smiled. That real smile, the one that transformed his whole face, and Poppy felt the last of her defenses crumble. This was a bad idea. This was a terrible idea. Falling for Leo Calder was absolutely the worst possible outcome. But watching him smile at her across a table covered in blueprints and takeout containers, Poppy couldn't quite remember why. The email arrived at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday, which Poppy would later identify as the precise moment her blood pressure decided to become a permanent problem. She was in the billiards room, alone, waiting for Leo to arrive with what he'd promised would be edible Italian food. They'd fallen into a rhythm over the past week, meeting at the Belmont every afternoon, working through dinner, arguing productively, and occasionally, accidentally, almost touching. It was becoming a problem, a pleasant problem, a dangerous problem. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, expecting a text from Leo about traffic or parking or whatever crises rich people had. Instead, she saw an email from Leo's development team, CC'd to both of them with a subject line that made her stomach drop. Arcadia. Arcadia Capital withdraws funding. Poppy clicked it open, her heart already racing. Dear Mr. Calder and Ms. Vance, we regret to inform you that Arcadia Capital has decided to withdraw its commitment to the Belmont renovation project. After reviewing the revised scope, which emphasizes historic preservation over modernization, our investors feel the risk profile no longer aligns with our portfolio strategy. We wish you the best of luck in securing alternative funding. Sincerely, J. Worthington III. Managing Partner, Arcadia Capital. Poppy read it 3 times, then a 4th. Then she set her phone down very carefully, as if it might explode. Arcadia Capital was the project's largest private investor. Their commitment represented nearly 40% of the renovation budget. Without them, the door slammed open. Leo stood in the doorway, his face a thundercloud, his phone clutched in one white-knuckled hand. He was breathing hard, like he'd run up the stairs instead of taking the elevator. You saw it, he said. It wasn't a question. I saw it. This is... He stopped, ran his hand through his hair, paced to the window and back. This is exactly what I was afraid of. This is why I pushed for the modern design. Investors don't trust historic. They see it as risk, as uncertainty, as... Leo. Poppy stood, moving toward him. Breathe. Don't tell me to breathe. He rounded on her, frustration radiating off him in waves. This is real, Poppy. This is the project falling apart. Without Arcadia, we don't have enough capital. Without enough capital, we can't move forward. Without moving forward, the Belmont becomes a parking lot. I know. She stopped a few feet from him, close enough to feel the heat of his anger. I understand the stakes. I've been living them my whole life, remember? Something in his expression shifted. The anger didn't disappear, but it softened, made room for something else. Something that looked almost like guilt. I know you have, he said quietly. I'm sorry. I shouldn't take this out on you. You're not wrong to be furious. This sucks. It's a massive setback. She took a breath. But it's not the end. Leo stared at her. You have a plan. I have the beginning of a plan. A direction. She gestured vaguely. A thing. A thing. Come here. She grabbed his wrist, his actual wrist, skin on skin, and wasn't that electric, and pulled him toward the billiards table, where her notes and blueprints were spread out like a paper mosaic. Look at this. She pointed at the palm court sketches. We've been approaching this wrong. We've been trying to convince investors that preservation is compatible with profit, that it won't hurt their returns, that it's a safe bet. Yes, that's literally the entire pitch. And it's not working. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, grabbed a marker, started sketching. Because safe doesn't excite anyone. Safe doesn't make headlines. Safe doesn't get people fighting to invest. Leo leaned over the table, watching her draw. Then what does? Luxury, exclusivity. A story so compelling people can't wait to be part of it. She drew a rough logo. The Belmont. Est. 1928. We're not preserving a building. We're resurrecting a legend. I'm listening. She was on a roll now. the ideas coming faster than she could articulate them. The original artisans who worked on this building, they're gone, obviously. But their descendants? Their techniques? There are craftsmen in this city who still do hand-carved molding, hand-painted gold leaf, custom plasterwork. We hire them, we document the process, we make the restoration itself a story. Leo's eyes were sharp, focused, tracking her every word. The lost blueprints, she continued. We digitize them, frame them, put them in every room. Guests aren't just staying in a hotel, they're sleeping in a piece of history. The original layouts become floor plans. The original sketches become art. We make the building's past its biggest selling point. He stopped, seeming to search for words. That's actually brilliant. It's marketing, it's branding, it's taking what makes this place special and turning it into something people can't get anywhere else. She grabbed another page, scribbling notes as she talked. Exclusive tours of the restoration process, limited edition prints of the original blueprints, a coffee table book about the building's history sold in the gift shop. We're not just renovating a hotel, we're creating a destination. Leo was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Poppy, he shook his head. I've been doing this for 15 years. I've never met anyone who thinks like you do. Is that a good thing? It's a terrifying thing. But he was smiling. Actually smiling. You just turned our biggest crisis into our biggest opportunity in 5 minutes with a marker and a napkin. It's not a napkin, it's printer paper. Same energy. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes, the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. If we can sell this, if we can put together a pitch that makes investors see what you just showed me, we can save the Belmont, for real, not as a compromise, as a vision. They stood there, inches apart, the energy between them crackling with something that had nothing to do with the project. We should get to work, Leo said, but he didn't move. We should, Poppy agreed, also not moving. Another beat, another breath. Then Leo stepped back, breaking the spell. Order food, he said, pulling out his phone. I'm calling my team. We're going to need lawyers, marketers, financial analysts. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Poppy nodded, grabbing her own phone. I'll pull together all the historical documentation. Original permits, photographs, newspaper articles from 1928. We need to build a narrative that's unassailable. We have 3 weeks until the board meeting. Less, now, because we have to find new investors first. Then we'd better get started. They worked through the night. Leo's team joined via video call, a rotating cast of exhausted professionals who looked increasingly alarmed as the hours ticked past. Poppy's contacts at the Historical Society dug up documents she didn't even know existed. By 2 a.m., they had the skeleton of a proposal. By 4 a.m., they had a draft that actually made sense. By 6 a.m., as the sun began to rise over the city, they had something that felt almost like a plan. Poppy was slumped in a chair, her eyes burning, her coffee cold and forgotten, when Leo appeared beside her with a fresh cup. You're still here, he said quietly. Where else would I be? Home. Sleeping. Living a normal life where you don't spend all night saving buildings with infuriating developers. She took the coffee. Their fingers brushed. Neither of them acknowledged it. I can sleep when the Belmont is saved, she said. Right now, I have work to do. Leo looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. You know, he said, when this project started, I thought you were my biggest problem. And now? Now, I think you might be the best thing that's ever happened to it. He paused. To me. Poppy's heart stuttered. She swallowed. That's quite a statement for 6 a.m. It's the truth. He held her gaze, Whatever happens with the Belmont, Poppy, I'm glad I met you." Before she could respond, before she could even process what he'd said, he turned and walked back to the table, where his team was waiting with more questions. Poppy sat there, coffee warming her hands, watching him work. And for the first time in a very long time, she let herself imagine a future that included him. The pitch was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, which meant Poppy spent the entire weekend in a state of controlled panic that her therapist would definitely have called anxiety if Poppy still went to therapy. She didn't. She fought old buildings instead. Same energy, fewer copays. Leo had secured the meeting through what he called aggressive networking and what Poppy called threatening people until they agreed to listen. The investors were a small group, 5 representatives from 3 different firms, but they represented enough capital to replace Arcadia and then some. If this went well, the Belmont project would not only survive, but thrive. If it went badly, Poppy wasn't allowing herself to think about that. The meeting was held in a conference room at Leo's office because apparently his building had conference rooms that cost more than most people's apartments. Poppy arrived early, as always, wearing her power suit and carrying a binder full of historical documentation that weighed approximately as much as a small child. Leo was already there, standing by the window, looking out at the city. He turned when she entered, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. "You ready?" he asked. "I've been ready my whole life." He almost smiled. That's either very inspiring or very concerning. Both. Definitely both. The investors arrived promptly at 2 p.m., which Poppy respected. They were a mix of ages and backgrounds. A silver-haired woman who looked like she'd been in finance since before Poppy was born. A young guy with glasses who kept checking his phone. A middle-aged man with the kind of expensive watch that screamed, "I have something to prove." Leo started the pitch. He was, Poppy had to admit, brilliant, smooth, confident, utterly in control. He walked them through the numbers, the projected returns, the market analysis, the competitive landscape, with the kind of ease that made it all sound simple, profitable, inevitable. "The Belmont isn't just a hotel," he said, clicking to a slide showing the building's facade. "It's a brand, a story, a piece of New York history that can never be replicated. And in the luxury market, uniqueness is everything." The investors nodded. The young guy put down his phone. "Poppy's turn." She stood, moving to the front of the room, and for a moment she felt the familiar flutter of stage fright. But then she looked at Leo, and he nodded, and something in his expression steadied her. "This building," she said, pulling up images of the Palm Court, "was designed by architects who believed hotels should be destinations. Not just places to sleep, but places to experience. The gold leaf on this ceiling? Hand-applied by artisans trained in Europe. The marble floors? Quarried in Italy, shipped across the Atlantic, laid by craftsmen who spent their whole lives learning their trade." She clicked through more images. The ballroom, the mezzanine, the original blueprints. "When we renovate the Belmont, we're not just updating a building. We're resurrecting a legacy. We're hiring the descendants of those original craftsmen to do the restoration work. We're documenting every step of the process and turning it into content. We're making the building's history the luxury experience." She pulled up her favorite slide. A mock-up of a hotel room with framed blueprints on the wall, a leather-bound book about the building's history on the nightstand, a view of the Palm Court through an original window. Guests won't just stay at the Belmont, they'll own a piece of it. The story becomes theirs, and they'll pay a premium for that privilege. When she finished, the room was quiet. Then the silver-haired woman smiled. "That," she said, "is the most compelling pitch I've heard in years." The young guy nodded. The watch guy was actually taking notes. Leo caught Poppy's eye and gave her a look that made her heart do something complicated. They weren't done yet, but for the first time, it felt like they might actually win. Afterward, high on success and adrenaline, they ended up on the hotel's unfinished rooftop. The sun had set while they were in the meeting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Now the city was coming alive below them, thousands of lights flickering on as evening settled over Manhattan. The view was breathtaking, the kind of vista that made you remember why people fought so hard for this city, for these buildings, for these moments. Poppy stood at the edge, Leo beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body without quite touching. "We did it," she said softly. "We did it." His voice was rough. "You did it." That pitch, Poppy, I've never seen anything like it. It was a team effort. It was you, your vision, your passion. I just crunched numbers. You crunched numbers beautifully. He laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him, and the sound made her smile. I don't think anyone has ever called my number crunching beautiful before. First time for everything. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the city glitter below them. The breeze was warm, carrying the smell of exhaust and summer and possibility. "Leo," Poppy said after a moment. "Yeah?" "Thank you for giving this a chance, for listening, for—" she gestured vaguely. "All of it." He turned to look at her, and in the fading light, his eyes were almost soft. "Thank you for making me see it, for making me see." He stopped, seeming to search for words. "For making me see that there's more to building than just building. That history matters, that stories matter, that you matter." Poppy's breath caught. "Leo." "I know." He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I know this is complicated. I know we're supposed to be professionals. I know there are a million reasons why this is a terrible idea." "There are," she whispered. "But standing here, right now, looking at you." He reached up, slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a piece of hair from her face. "I can't remember a single one." The city hummed below them. The stars were starting to come out. Poppy's heart was beating so loud she was sure he could hear it. "Leo." His name was barely a breath. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. "Tell me this is a mistake. Tell me to walk away, and I will. I'll never mention it again. We'll go back to being partners, colleagues, whatever you need. Just tell me." Poppy looked at him. At this man who'd been her enemy, her adversary, her partner. This man who'd seen through her walls and let her see through his. This man who'd stayed up all night with her, who'd believed in her vision, who'd looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. "I don't want you to walk away," she said. And then she kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, questioning, but then his hands were in her hair, and her arms were around his neck, and the city lights blurred into a wash of color as he pulled her closer, kissed her deeper, made her forget every reason why this was a terrible idea. When they finally broke apart, breathless and shaking, he rested his forehead against hers. "That," he said, "was worth the wait." 3 weeks? 33 years. Poppy laughed, the sound surprising her. "You're ridiculous." "I'm honest." He kissed her forehead. "There's a difference." They stood there on the rooftop, wrapped in each other and the warm summer night, the city glittering below them like a promise. For the first time in a very long time, Poppy let herself believe in happily ever after. The city stretched out below them like a living thing, breathing and pulsing and glittering in the warm summer night. Poppy stood at the edge of the rooftop, Leo beside her, their shoulders brushing in a way that felt deliberate now, intentional. Neither of them had moved since the kiss. Neither of them wanted to. "What are you afraid of?" Poppy asked quietly, not looking at him. The question hung in the air between them, intimate and dangerous. She felt him tense beside her, felt the shift in his breathing. "That's a hell of a question for a first date," he said, but his voice lacked its usual armor. "Is this a date?" "I don't know what this is, but it's not nothing." Poppy turned to look at him. In the soft glow of the city lights, his face was all sharp angles and shadows, beautiful and unreadable. "You don't have to answer," she said. I want to know you. The real you. Not the developer. Not the ruthless businessman. Just Leo." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I'm afraid of being forgotten." Poppy's heart clenched. "I've spent my whole life building things," he continued, still not looking at her. "Skyscrapers, hotels, companies, things that will outlast me, things that will stand for decades, maybe centuries, after I'm gone. And the thought that—" He stopped, swallowed. "The thought that none of it will matter. That I'll be just another name on a contract, another face in a photograph, another developer who built things and died and was forgotten." "Leo, I know it sounds ridiculous. I know I have more than most people could ever dream of, but I came into this world with nothing. No family, no history, no proof that I ever existed, and I've been running from that my whole life, building and building and building, trying to leave a mark, trying to make sure that when I'm gone, someone will remember." Poppy reached out and took his hand. He startled slightly, then his fingers curled around hers, holding on like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. "That's not ridiculous," she said softly. "That's human." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw it. The fear, the longing, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd found someone who understood. "What about you?" he asked. "What are you afraid of?" Poppy took a breath. Let it out slowly. "I'm afraid of irrelevance." His brow furrowed. "I've spent my whole life fighting for things that are already gone," she explained. "Old buildings, lost histories, stories that no one remembers. And sometimes I wonder—" She laughed, but it was hollow. "Sometimes I wonder if it matters, if any of it matters, if I'm just tilting at windmills, fighting battles that were lost before I was born." "That's not true, isn't it? Look at me, Leo. I'm 31 years old. I live in a shoebox in Brooklyn. I have a cat who judges me and a job that pays nothing and a family that's falling apart. And what do I have to show for it? A few plaques on buildings no one visits. A couple of articles in preservation journals no one reads. A reputation as that woman who cares too much about old stuff." She pulled her hand away, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm afraid that when I'm gone, no one will remember me either. But not because I built too much, because I didn't build anything at all, because I spent my whole life saving things and never created anything of my own." The silence that followed was heavy with shared vulnerability. Then Leo stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him at her back. His hands came up to rest on her shoulders, gentle, questioning. "Poppy," his voice was soft. "Look at me." She turned. He was right there, inches away, his eyes searching her face. "The Belmont," he said. "That's yours. That's ours. We're building something together. Something that will last. Something that people will remember. A hotel. A legend." He smiled, that real smile, the one that transformed his whole face. "And after this, there will be other buildings, other projects, other chances to leave your mark. Not just saving history, but making it." Poppy's eyes burned. "You really believe that?" "I really believe in you." The words landed like a blow, gentle and devastating all at once. "Leo, I know it's fast. I know we're supposed to take this slow, be professional, all of that. He reached up, cupping her face in his hands. But I've spent my whole life waiting for something, someone, and I didn't know it until I met you. Poppy's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. What are we doing? She whispered. I don't know. He leaned closer, his forehead touching hers. But I know I don't want to stop. And then he kissed her. Not like before, not tentative or questioning. This was different. This was claiming and surrender all at once, his mouth moving against hers like he was trying to memorize her, like he was afraid she might disappear. Poppy's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and he groaned against her lips, the sound vibrating through her whole body. When they finally broke apart, gasping, he rested his forehead against hers. I'm terrified, he admitted. Of what? Of losing this, of losing you, of finally finding something worth holding on to and watching it slip away. Poppy reached up, touching his face, tracing the line of his jaw. Then hold on tighter, she said. He kissed her again, and this time there was no fear in it. Just promise, just possibility, just the two of them on a rooftop in the middle of the city, building something new from the ashes of everything they'd lost. The weeks that followed were a blur of blueprints and late nights and stolen moments that Poppy stored up like treasure, each one more precious than the last. There was the night they worked until 2 a.m. in the Palm Court, spread out on the floor with papers everywhere, and Leo had looked up to find her asleep against a column. He'd woken her with a kiss and carried her, actually carried her, to his car, and she'd pretended to be sleepier than she was, just to stay in his arms a little longer. There was the evening they tested the acoustics in the ballroom, taking turns standing on the stage and shouting terrible karaoke into the empty space. Leo's rendition of Sweet Caroline was objectively awful, but Poppy laughed so hard she cried, and he chased her around the room until he caught her and kissed her breathless. There was the afternoon they got locked in the service elevator for an hour and a half, and instead of panicking, they talked. Really talked. About his childhood in foster care, about the families who'd returned him like a library book he hadn't asked to borrow, about her father's slow unraveling, her mother's retreat into socialite survival mode, the way grief had reshaped her family into strangers. I used to think I was broken, Leo admitted, his voice quiet in the dark elevator. That there was something wrong with me. Why else would no one keep me? Poppy had taken his hand, laced her fingers through his. You're not broken. You're just rare. People don't know what to do with rare. He'd kissed her then, soft and sweet, and when the elevator finally lurched back to life, they'd both felt something shift. There were the nights at his apartment. His place was nothing like she'd expected. Sleek, yes. Modern, absolutely. But also warm in ways she hadn't anticipated. Books stacked on coffee tables, a record player in the corner, a balcony full of plants he actually remembered to water. It felt like a home, not a showroom, and that surprised her more than anything. Did you decorate this yourself? She asked one night, curled up on his couch, wearing his shirt and nothing else. He looked almost embarrassed. Is that weird? She smiled. It's really nice, Leo. It feels like you. Yeah? He sat beside her, pulling her against his chest. No one's ever said that before. Then no one's ever really seen you. He kissed the top of her head. You see me. I do. There were the moments in the Belmond, too numerous to count. Walking through the empty corridors, pointing out details only she would notice. Him listening, really listening, asking questions that showed he cared. Her catching him staring at her instead of the architecture, and the way his eyes went soft when she caught him. You're looking at me like I'm a building you want to save, she teased. I'm looking at you like you're the only thing worth saving, he replied, and she kissed him right there in the middle of the mezzanine, not caring who saw. They finalized the proposal on a Thursday, 3 days before the deadline. It was beautiful, comprehensive, a document that somehow managed to be both historically rigorous and financially brilliant. Every detail they'd fought over, every compromise they'd negotiated, every late-night epiphany, all of it was there, bound in leather and ready to present. Poppy stood back from the table, looking at it, and felt tears prick her eyes. "We did it," she whispered. Leo came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "We did it. It's really happening. It's really happening." She turned in his arms, facing him. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You couldn't have done this without you. I just wrote checks." "You wrote checks and listened. That's not nothing." He kissed her, slow and sweet. "I love you," he said against her lips. The words hung in the air between them, unexpected and perfect. Poppy's heart stuttered. "What?" "I love you." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "I know it's fast. I know we're supposed to take things slow, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, Poppy Vance." She stared at him for a long moment, this man who'd started as her enemy and become her partner, her confidant, her heart. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have for a while." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and when they finally broke apart, laughing and breathless, the proposal sat on the table between them like a promise. That weekend, Leo took her to meet his friends. They were a small group, a handful of people he'd collected over the years, the ones who'd stuck. There was Marcus, a former foster brother who now ran a construction company in Queens. There was Jenna, a lawyer who'd helped him with his first real estate deal and never left. There was old Mr. Kim, who ran the corner store near Leo's first apartment and had given him credit when he was broke and hungry. They gathered at a Korean barbecue place in Flushing, and Poppy watched Leo transform. He was different here, softer, funnier, more at ease. He laughed at Marcus's terrible jokes. He argued with Jenna about some case she was working. He helped Mr. Kim navigate the menu with the kind of patience Poppy had never seen in him. "You're good with them," she said quietly when they were alone for a moment. "They're good with me. They've been there when no one else was." "That's rare." "That's family." He looked at her, something vulnerable in his eyes. "Chosen family. The only kind I've ever really had." Poppy squeezed his hand under the table. "I'm glad you have them." "I'm glad I have you." The board meeting was scheduled for June 15th. In the days leading up to it, Poppy and Leo worked side by side, refining their presentation, anticipating questions, preparing for every possible outcome. They were a machine now, smooth, efficient, unstoppable. And at night, they were something else entirely. Tangled together in his bed, in her apartment, in the back of his car like teenagers. Poppy had never been this happy, had never known she could be this happy. The morning of the meeting, she woke in Leo's arms, the sun streaming through his floor-to-ceiling windows, and for a moment, everything was perfect. "Today's the day," he murmured, still half asleep. "Today's the day." He pulled her closer, kissing her shoulder. "Whatever happens, I'm glad I met you." "Same." She turned to face him. "But it's going to go well. I can feel it." "Yeah?" "Yeah. We're too stubborn to fail." He laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "That's true." They lay there for a few more minutes, holding each other, before the world intruded and forced them to get up, get dressed, get ready to fight for everything they'd built. But in that moment, in that quiet space between sleep and waking, Poppy believed. They were going to win. They had to. The pre-hearing mixer was held at a hotel downtown, not the Belmont, because apparently that would have been too on the nose, according to the event planner. Instead, they were in a generic ballroom with too many chandeliers and not enough character, surrounded by the kind of people who used words like synergy unironically. Poppy was wearing a dress that Leo had complimented approximately 17 times since she'd put it on, which felt like a new record. It was burgundy, fitted, and made her feel like she could take over the world, or at least survive a room full of developers and city officials. Leo was in his usual armor, navy suit, perfect tie, hair doing that thing where it looked effortlessly styled, even though Poppy knew he spent approximately 45 minutes on it. He had his arm around her waist, a casual possessiveness that made her stomach flutter every time. "You're staring," she murmured as they walked through the crowd. "You're worth staring at." "Smooth." "I try." They worked the room together, a well-oiled machine. Leo handled the investors, the city officials, the people who needed to hear about profit margins and ROI. Poppy handled the preservationists, the historical society reps, the people who needed to hear about legacy and meaning. They met in the middle for the undecideds, tag-teaming with the kind of precision that made people nod and take business cards. By 9 p.m., Poppy's face hurt from smiling and her feet hurt from heels, and she was desperately ready to go home and let Leo make it all better in the time-honored tradition of removing her dress with his teeth. "I need a drink," she whispered. "Bar's in the corner. I'll grab us something." He kissed her temple. "Don't go anywhere." "I'm anchored to these shoes. I'm not moving." He laughed and headed toward the bar, leaving Poppy leaning against a pillar, people watching. That's when she heard it. Two men, standing a few feet away, drinks in hand, not bothering to lower their voices. Developers, based on the suits and the confidence. The kind of men who'd been in the business long enough to think they were untouchable. Heard Calder finally found someone who'll work with him. The other man snorted. "Give it time. She'll figure out who she's dealing with." "You mean the Arcadia thing?" "That, and the Hudson Yards deal. Guy's got a reputation. Gets what he wants, no matter who gets hurt." Shakedown Calder, they used to call him, before he got too big to touch. Poppy's blood went cold. She told herself it was just gossip. Industry talk. The kind of rumors that followed anyone successful enough to have enemies. Leo had enemies. Of course he had enemies. Look at what he'd built. But the words echoed in her head anyway. Gets what he wants, no matter who gets hurt. Shakedown Calder. She thought about Arcadia Capital pulling out at the worst possible moment. Thought about Leo's fury, his fear, his desperation to save the project. Thought about how quickly they'd pivoted, how brilliant his pitch had been, how smoothly everything had fallen into place. No, she wasn't going there. "Poppy?" Leo was beside her, 2 glasses in his hands. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." She blinked, forcing a smile. "Just tired. Long night." He handed her a drink, something fancy and pink, and wrapped his arm around her again. "Almost done. One more round of handshakes and we can get out of here." "Promise?" "Promise." She leaned into him, letting his warmth chase away the chill. It was nothing. Just gossip. Just jealous men with nothing better to do. Right? They left at 10:30, stepping out into the warm summer night. The city was alive around them, taxis honking, people laughing, the usual chaos of Manhattan after dark. Leo's car was waiting, and he helped her in like she was something precious, something worth taking care of. "That was brutal," she said, collapsing against the leather seat. "You were brilliant." "I was surviving." "Same thing." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together, and they sat in comfortable silence as the car wound through the city streets. "Where are we going?" she asked eventually. "My place, unless you want to go to yours." Yours is closer. And has better wine. And has better wine, she agreed. They ended up on his balcony, wine in hand, the city spread out below them like a jewel box. It reminded her of that first night on the Belmont's rooftop, when everything had felt possible and terrifying and new. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Anything." Arcadia Capital. Why did they really pull out? Leo was quiet for a moment. "I told you. They didn't like the historic angle." "That's what you told me. But is that the whole story?" He turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "What are you asking, Poppy?" She hesitated. The words felt dangerous, like once spoken, they couldn't be taken back. "I overheard some people tonight talking about you, about deals you've done. They used a phrase." She stopped. Shakedown called her. Leo's face went very still. "Poppy." "I'm not accusing you of anything." She set down her wine, turning to face him fully. I need to know who you are, what I'm signing up for." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. When Leo finally spoke, his voice was rough. "I've done things," he said. "Things I'm not proud of. In the beginning, when I was fighting for every scrap, I played hard. Really hard. I used every advantage, every loophole, every piece of leverage I could find. And yeah, some people got hurt. Not physically, but financially, reputationally." Poppy's heart clenched. "Arcadia," she pressed. "Was that you?" "No." He met her eyes, steady and sure. "I swear to you, Poppy, Arcadia pulled out because of the market, not because of me. I was as blindsided as you were." She searched his face for any sign of deception, any flicker of the ruthlessness she knew he was capable of. But all she saw was honesty, vulnerability, fear. "I believe you," she said quietly. "You do?" "I do." She reached for his hand. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have let gossip get in my head." "No." He squeezed her fingers. "You should question me. You should want to know who I am. I'm not—" He laughed, but it was sad. "I'm not a good man, Poppy. Not the way you are. I've done things I regret. I've hurt people I shouldn't have. But I've never lied to you. And I never will." Poppy looked at him, this complicated, difficult, wonderful man, and made a choice. "I don't need you to be good," she said. "I need you to be honest. I need you to be mine." "I am." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "God, Poppy, I am so yours." They stood there on the balcony, wrapped in each other, the city glittering below them like a promise. Tomorrow, there would be more meetings, more negotiations, more battles to fight. But tonight, there was just this. Just them. Just the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too." He kissed her forehead, her cheek, her lips. "Forever." It felt like a beginning. It felt like an ending. It felt like everything. The public hearing was held in the city's landmarked municipal building, a Beaux-Arts masterpiece that Poppy had always loved for its marble columns and soaring ceilings. Today, she barely noticed them. Today, every nerve in her body was focused on the room ahead. The hearing chamber was packed. Developers, preservationists, journalists, curious citizens, everyone who'd been following the Belmont saga had come to see the finale. The energy was electric, buzzing with anticipation and gossip, and the particular tension that comes before a verdict. Poppy stood outside the chamber doors, Leo beside her, both of them dressed for battle. She was in a cream-colored suit that made her look like she meant business. He was in charcoal, his tie the exact shade of burgundy as her dress from the mixer. They'd coordinated on purpose. A united front, a statement. "You ready?" he asked, squeezing her hand. "I've been ready my whole life." He smiled. That real smile, the one that still made her heart flutter. "Then let's go in." They walked in together, heads high, and took their places at the front of the room. Commissioner Okonkwo was already seated at the dais, looking like a queen holding court. The other board members flanked her, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical to bored. The hearing began with opening statements. The opposition went first, a group of developers who wanted to scrap the whole project and start over with something more modern. Their presentation was slick, professional, and utterly soulless. Poppy watched the board members' faces and saw them struggling to stay engaged. Then it was their turn. Leo started, walking the room through the financials with the kind of smooth confidence that made complex numbers sound simple. He talked about ROI and market positioning and revenue projections, and even Poppy, who'd heard it all before, found herself nodding along. Then she took over. She walked them through the history, the stories, the soul of the building. She showed them photographs of the Palm Court's gold leaf, the ballroom's moldings, the original blueprints she'd rescued from obscurity. She talked about the craftsmen who'd built it, the generations who'd loved it, the legacy they were fighting to preserve. "This isn't just a building," she said, her voice ringing through the chamber. "It's a piece of New York's heart, and hearts don't belong in landfills. They belong to the people who love them." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Commissioner Okonkwo was smiling. The skeptical board members were nodding. Even the journalists were taking notes. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. Poppy turned to Leo, grinning, and saw the same relief and joy reflected in his eyes. They'd won. The Belmont was saved. Their future was. "The chair recognizes Mr. Harrison Blake." The name cut through the buzz like a knife. Poppy turned. A man was approaching the stand, older than Leo, silver-haired, expensively dressed. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from decades of power and privilege, and he was looking at Leo with an expression that made Poppy's blood run cold. "Mr. Blake," Commissioner Okonkwo said, "you've requested time to address the board. Please proceed." Blake smiled. It was not a nice smile. "I've been in this business for 40 years, he began, his voice smooth as oil. "I've seen a lot of developers come and go. Some are honest, some are not, and some," he looked at Leo, "some build their empires on the backs of people they've crushed." The room went very quiet. Leo's hand found Poppy's under the table. Squeezed once. She squeezed back, her heart pounding. "Mr. Blake," Okonkwo interjected, "if you have allegations to make, you'll need evidence." "I have plenty." Blake pulled a folder from his briefcase and held it up. "This contains the complete history of a deal Leo Calder made 5 years ago. A small stakeholder in a property on the Lower East Side, an elderly woman who'd owned her building for 40 years. She didn't want to sell. Calder wanted to buy, so he made her life hell." Poppy's stomach dropped. He had her building cited for code violations. Dozens of them, most of them fabricated. She couldn't afford the repairs, couldn't afford the fines, couldn't afford to fight. In the end, she sold for pennies on the dollar just to survive. Blake's voice hardened. "That woman died 6 months later. Heart attack," they said. But everyone who knew her knew the truth. Leo Calder killed her. Slowly, methodically, legally. The room erupted. Commissioner Okonkwo banged her gavel, shouting for order, but Poppy barely heard her. She was staring at Leo, waiting for him to deny it, to explain, to tell her it wasn't true. He didn't. His face was pale, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on some middle distance. He looked like a man watching his own execution. "Leo." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Leo, Look at me. He turned. The expression in his eyes was worse than anything she could have imagined. Not defiance, not denial, just acknowledgement. Is it true? She asked. Poppy. Is it true? The silence stretched between them, a chasm opening where solid ground used to be. It's complicated, he said finally. There were circumstances. Complicated. She laughed, but it was hollow. Complicated. It was 5 years ago. I was different then. You were Shakedown Calder. The name hung in the air between them like a verdict. Leo reached for her. She pulled away. Poppy, please, let me explain. Explain what? That you destroyed someone's life? That you drove a woman to her grave? Her voice was rising, cracking. That you're exactly what those men at the mixer said you were? It's not that simple. It never is it? She stood, backing away from the table, from him, from everything they'd built. You told me you'd never lied to me. Was that a lie too? I didn't lie. You just omitted. You just let me believe you were someone else. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't care. I trusted you, Leo. I gave you everything, and you're exactly what everyone said you were. Poppy. Don't. She held up a hand, stopping him. Just don't. And then she walked out. The chamber doors slammed behind her, cutting off the chaos, the shouting, the sound of her own heart breaking. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The hallway was cold. Marble floors, marble walls, marble columns, everything hard and unyielding, like the truth she'd just learned. Poppy leaned against a pillar, her hands shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps that she couldn't seem to control. Behind her, the chamber doors were still closed, but she could hear the chaos through them. Raised voices, the pounding of Commissioner Okonkwo's gavel, the buzz of a crowd that had just watched something explode. She should leave. She should walk out of this building and never look back. That was the smart play. That was the self-preservation play. But her feet wouldn't move. The doors slammed open. Leo emerged, his face ashen, his tie askew. He spotted her immediately and crossed the distance between them in seconds, stopping just out of reach, like he was afraid she'd bolt if he got too close. Poppy. His voice was raw. Poppy, let me explain. Explain what? She heard how broken she sounded. How small. That it's true? That you did those things? I didn't. He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. It's not that simple. It never is it? With you, it's always complicated. Always circumstances. Always a reason why the rules don't apply. That's not fair. Fair? She laughed, and it was ugly, jagged. You want to talk about fair? There was a woman, Leo, a real person, with a home she loved and a life she'd built, and you. Her voice cracked. You took it all. You took everything. I didn't take anything. I made an offer. She chose to accept. She chose because you left her no choice, because you used your power, your money, your lawyers to destroy her until surrendering was the only option left. Poppy's eyes burned. That's not a choice. That's a shakedown. Leo's jaw tightened. It's business. It's how the game is played. The game? She stared at him like she'd never seen him before. That woman's life was a game to you? Of course not, but you don't understand. I understand perfectly. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a furious whisper. I understand that you're exactly what those men said you were. Shakedown Calder, a predator who uses power to destroy people. The same kind of predator who bankrupted my father. who took my family's home, who left us with nothing but memories and grief. Leo flinched like she'd slapped him. It's not the same, he said. It's exactly the same. You just have a nicer suit and a better smile. The words hung between them, brutal and final. Poppy. Did you ever think about her? She interrupted. The woman whose life you destroyed? Did you ever wonder what happened to her after she signed those papers? Did you ever lose a single night's sleep over what you did? Leo was quiet for too long. That's what I thought. Poppy's voice was cold now, frozen solid. You didn't. Because people like you don't think about the people you crush. You just move on to the next deal, the next building, the next victim. That was 5 years ago. I've changed. Have you? She looked at him, really looked at him, searching for the man she'd fallen in love with. But all she saw now was a stranger. A ruthless stranger wearing a familiar face. Because from where I'm standing, you're still hiding. Still lying. Still letting me believe in a version of you that never existed. I never lied to you. You let me believe. You let me fall in love with a fantasy while the reality was sitting right there in your past, waiting to destroy everything. She shook her head slowly. That's worse than lying. She stopped, swallowing hard. That's unforgivable. Leo reached for her. She stepped back. Don't. Poppy, please. I love you. No. The word was sharp, final. You loved the idea of me. The woman who believed in you, who fought for you, who made you feel like you could be someone better. But that woman was a fool. And I'm done being a fool. She turned and walked back toward the chamber doors. Poppy, wait. She didn't wait. The room fell silent when she re-entered. Commissioner Okonkwo looked up, surprise flickering across her face. The board members leaned forward. The journalists raised their cameras. The developers in the back row whispered to each other, hungry for more drama. Poppy walked to the front of the room, turned to face them all. Miss Vance, Okonkwo said carefully, the board is prepared to recess while we investigate these allegations. There's no need. The room went very quiet. Poppy took a breath, let it out slowly. She could feel Leo behind her, frozen in the doorway, waiting for her to save him. She didn't. I came here today to fight for the Belmont, she said, her voice steady despite everything. To fight for its history, its soul, its future. And I believed, foolishly, it turns out, that I had found a partner who shared that vision. She looked out at the crowd, saw the journalists scribbling, the developers smirking, the preservationists looking confused and worried. But I can't fight for a building when the person standing beside me has spent his career destroying the very things I'm trying to save. I can't stand here and pretend that the past doesn't matter, not the building's past, and not his. Poppy, don't, Leo's voice from behind her, desperate. She ignored him. Mr. Calder's tactics are exactly the kind of predatory behavior that has turned this city into a playground for the rich at the expense of everyone else. And I will not be part of it. I will not lend my name, my reputation, or my vote to a project led by someone who treats people like obstacles. She turned to face the board. I vote no. The room erupted. Commissioner Okonkwo was shouting for order. Journalists were rushing for the doors. Developers were laughing and shaking hands like they'd just won the lottery. And Leo? Leo stood in the doorway, devastation etched into every line of his face, watching Poppy walk away for the second time. This time, she didn't look back. The hallway was empty when she finally emerged. Cold marble, harsh lights, the echo of her own footsteps. She made it to the elevator, punched the button, leaned against the wall as her legs gave out. She'd done it. She'd killed the project. She destroyed everything they'd built. She'd lost him. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside, watched the numbers tick down as the building fell away above her. And for the first time since she was a little girl, standing in an empty house watching strangers carry away her family's life, Poppy Vance let herself fall apart. 3 weeks passed like a slow bleed. Poppy stopped counting the days somewhere around the 2nd week when she realized that counting only made it worse. Each morning she woke up, stared at the ceiling, and waited for the hollow feeling in her chest to fade. It didn't. It just sat there, heavy and permanent, like a second heart made of concrete. She stopped going to her usual coffee shop because the barista asked about the Belmont, stopped answering her mother's calls because her mother wanted to talk about that awful developer, and Poppy couldn't hear him spoken about like that, stopped leaving her apartment except when absolutely necessary, because the city was full of memories and she was full of grief. Dorian was her only companion. He sat on her chest while she stared at the ceiling, purring like a tiny engine, occasionally licking her face when she cried. He was not a comforting cat, but he was her cat, and right now that was enough. Sasha came over on the weekends with takeout and wine and pointed questions that Poppy deflected with practiced skill. "You're a mess," Sasha said flatly on the 3rd Saturday, watching Poppy push pad thai around her plate. "Thank you for that observation. Very helpful." "I'm not trying to be helpful. I'm trying to understand." Sasha set down her fork. "You loved him. He loved you. And you walked away." "He lied to me." "He didn't lie. He just didn't tell you about something that happened 5 years ago. Something he was clearly ashamed of. Something that—" Sasha hesitated. "Something that maybe isn't as black and white as you're making it." Poppy's jaw tightened. He destroyed a woman's life. He made a hard business decision that had consequences he probably didn't foresee. It's not the same thing. "It's exactly the same thing." "Is it?" Sasha leaned forward. "Or is it that you're so afraid of becoming your father, weak, helpless, destroyed by people with power, that you can't see the difference between someone who takes and someone who survives?" The words landed like a slap. "That's not—" "Your father made bad choices. He gambled. He lost. He let his family fall apart around him. That wasn't Leo's fault. That wasn't some developer's fault. That was your father." Sasha's voice softened. "And I love you. So I'm going to say this. You've been punishing Leo for your dad's failures since the day you met him. And when you finally had a real reason to be angry, you used it as an excuse to destroy everything good in your life." Poppy stared at her, speechless. "I'm not saying what Leo did was right. I'm not saying you should forgive him. But I am saying you need to look at yourself and ask, who are you really angry at?" Sasha left an hour later, after extracting a promise that Poppy would eat something and maybe shower. Poppy sat alone in her apartment, Dorian in her lap, and thought about everything her friend had said. "You've been punishing Leo for your dad's failures." Was that true? She thought about the first time she'd seen Leo, standing in the Belmont's lobby like he owned it. Thought about the rage that had surged through her, hot and immediate. Thought about how quickly she'd decided he was the enemy, the villain, the predator. He hadn't been the one who'd taken her family's home. He hadn't even known about it, but she'd blamed him anyway. Had seen in him every developer who'd ever profited from someone else's loss. And when the truth about his past had come out, when she'd had a real reason to be angry, she'd used it as a weapon, not against what he'd done, but against who she was afraid he was. You can't fill a hole in your heart with other people's history. His words, from that first real conversation. He'd seen it then. He'd known what she was doing. And she'd punished him for it anyway. Poppy buried her face in her hands and cried until there was nothing left. Across the city, Leo stood in his empty apartment, staring at a half-packed suitcase. The project was dead. The Belmont would be sold to the highest bidder, probably the very developers who'd exposed him at the hearing. Everything he'd built, everything they'd built, was gone. He'd spent the last 3 weeks in a fog, going through the motions of wrapping up loose ends, selling off assets, preparing for the inevitable. New York had been his home for 20 years, but there was nothing left for him here now. No project, no future, no Poppy. Marcus had come by twice, trying to talk him out of leaving. Jenna had called a dozen times, leaving voicemails he never returned. Even old Mr. Kim had sent a text. "You eat? Come store. I feed you." That Leo had stared at for an hour before typing a polite refusal. He couldn't face them. Couldn't face anyone who'd known him before, who'd seen him at his worst, who might look at him now and see the same ruthless predator everyone else saw. Because maybe they were right. Maybe that's all he'd ever been. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Then again. Finally, annoyed, he picked it up. "Unknown. Mr. Calder, this is Geraldine from the Landmarks office. We're doing a final walkthrough of the Belmont tomorrow before the sale. Your presence is required for sign-off. 10 a.m. Don't be late." Leo stared at the message. The Belmont. The last place he'd been happy. The last place he'd been himself. He should ignore it. Send a lawyer. Let the building go without saying goodbye. But something, stupidity, masochism, the ghost of hope, made him type back. "Leo, I'll be there." The Belmont was even more depressing in the gray morning light. Leo stood in the lobby, alone, waiting for whoever was supposed to meet him. The building was empty now. No workers, no equipment, no signs of the life they'd planned to bring back. Just dust and shadows, and the echo of footsteps that would never come. He walked through the rooms one by one. The palm court, its gold leaf dull under a layer of grime. The ballroom, empty and silent, the ghost of their karaoke night haunting the corners. The billiards room, where they'd spent so many nights arguing and laughing and falling in love. Everywhere he looked, he saw her. Poppy, pointing out details only she would notice. Poppy, flushed with victory after winning an argument. Poppy, asleep against a column, peaceful and soft and so beautiful it hurt. Poppy, looking at him like he was worth something, like he was someone worth loving. He ended up on the rooftop, the place where everything had changed. The city spread out below him, glittering and indifferent, going on with its life while his fell apart. "I'm sorry," he whispered to no one. "I'm so sorry." The words disappeared into the wind, swallowed by the city that had made him and broken him in equal measure. He turned to leave. And froze. Because standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the gray sky, was Poppy. The wind whipped across the rooftop, carrying the smell of rain and exhaust and possibility. Poppy stood in the doorway, frozen, watching Leo turn toward her. He looked terrible. That was her first thought, irrational and immediate. His suit was rumpled, his hair a mess, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, which, she realized, probably meant he hadn't. Just like her. "Poppy." His voice was rough, disbelieving. "What are you doing here?" "I don't know." She stepped onto the rooftop, the door closing behind her with a soft click. I couldn't stay away. This place, it's the only place that ever felt real." Leo nodded slowly. "I know what you mean." They stood there, 20 feet apart, the same distance they'd been that first day in the lobby. So much had changed. So much had stayed the same. "I've been thinking," Poppy said, her voice barely above a whisper. About what you said. About me. About my father. Leo didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. You were right. The words cost her everything. I've been punishing you for his failures my whole life. Every developer, every businessman, every person with power, I saw them all as the enemy, as the people who took everything from us. And when I met you, she laughed, but it was sad. You were the perfect target. Rich, successful, ruthless. Everything I thought I hated. Poppy. Let me finish. She took a breath. When Blake testified, when I heard what you'd done, I didn't see you. I saw him, my father's creditors, the people who circled like vultures while our world collapsed. I saw every villain I'd ever imagined, and I put your face on them. Leo's expression was unreadable. What you saw was real. I did those things. I know. She stepped closer. And I'm not saying they don't matter. I'm not saying they're okay, but they're also not the whole story. Aren't they? No. She was close enough now to see the pain in his eyes, the walls he'd built so carefully crumbling around him. The whole story is a man who built himself from nothing, who fought for every scrap, every deal, every chance, who made mistakes, terrible mistakes, and learned from them. Who changed? Did I? His voice cracked. Did I really change? Or did I just get better at hiding? I don't know. She reached out tentatively and touched his face. He flinched, then leaned into her palm like a starving man offered bread. But I know the man I fell in love with. The man who stayed up all night with me, who listened when I talked about history, who looked at me like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. That man was real. That man wasn't hiding. Leo's eyes glistened. I didn't know I was supposed to be anyone's hero, he whispered. I've only ever known how to be my own. The words broke something in her. You're not a hero, she said softly. Neither am I. We're just people. Broken people trying to build something whole. I would undo it. His voice was urgent now, desperate. Every deal, every tactic, every person I hurt. I would undo it all if I could. Not to save the Belmont, not to save my reputation, to save what you thought of me, to be the man you deserved. Poppy's eyes burned. Leo. I know I can't. I know the past doesn't work that way, but I need you to know. He stopped, swallowing hard. You made me want to be better. You made me believe I could be. And losing you, his voice broke. Losing you showed me that I'd spent my whole life building things that didn't matter, while the one thing that did was right in front of me. He stepped back, out of her reach. I'll go, he said quietly. I'll leave New York. You'll never have to see me again. I'll sign whatever papers you want, stay wherever you need me to stay. He looked at her, and there was nothing left in his eyes but truth. Just know that I loved you, that I love you, that I'll always love you. He turned toward the door, and Poppy stopped him. Leo. He froze. If you walk away now, she said, I'll follow you. He turned slowly, disbelief written across his face. What? I've spent my whole life running from the past, from my father's failures, from my family's collapse, from every loss I couldn't prevent, and all it's done is leave me alone in an empty apartment with a judgmental cat and a heart full of regret. She moved toward him, closing the distance between them. I'm done running. Poppy. I'm not saying I forgive what you did. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but I'm also not saying that your past gets to define your future. Our future. She reached him, took his hands in hers. I love you, Leo Calder. I love the man you are, not just the man you want to be. And if you're willing to fight, for us, for the Belmond, for a future built on truth instead of secrets, then I'm willing to fight with you." He stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Hope, maybe, or fear, or both. "You really mean that?" "I really mean that." And then he kissed her. It wasn't like their other kisses, not urgent or desperate or triumphant. It was soft, reverent, a promise and a prayer all at once. Poppy wrapped her arms around him and held on, feeling the last of her walls crumble into dust. When they finally broke apart, breathless and crying and laughing all at once, Leo rested his forehead against hers. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Probably not." She smiled through her tears. "But you've got me anyway." "I love you." "I love you too." They stood there on the rooftop, the city spread out below them, and for the first time in weeks, the world felt possible again. 6 months later, the Belmond reopened. The restoration had been everything they'd dreamed: painstaking, beautiful, authentic. The palm court gleamed with restored gold leaf. The ballroom sparkled with cleaned crystal. The guest rooms featured framed blueprints and leather-bound books about the building's history, just as Poppy had envisioned. And in the lobby, a small plaque honored the woman from the Lower East Side, the one Leo had wronged years ago. It was his idea, his penance, his promise that he would spend the rest of his life trying to be better. Poppy stood in the lobby now, watching guests wander through, marveling at the beauty, taking photos, making memories. Leo came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts," he murmured. "I was just thinking," she smiled. "We did it." "We did it." He kissed her temple. "You did it." It was a team effort. Speaking of teams, he pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box. Poppy's heart stopped. "Leo." "I know we've been through a lot," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I'm not perfect. I know I'll probably screw up again. But I also know that I don't want to spend a single day of my life without you." He opened the box. Inside, a ring, antique gold, with a small diamond flanked by 2 sapphires. It looked like something from another era, like something that belonged in the Belmond. "I had it made from the original blueprints," he explained. "The design is based on the moldings in the Palm Court. I thought," he laughed nervously, "I thought you might like something with history." Poppy stared at the ring, then at him, then back at the ring. "Leo Calder," she said, her voice shaking. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking you to build a future with me, a real one, with history and meaning and," he swallowed, "and love, so much love." She threw her arms around him, knocking the box from his hands, not caring where it landed. "Yes," she whispered into his neck. "Yes, yes, yes." He held her tight, laughing, crying, not caring who saw. When they finally pulled apart, the ring was retrieved and slipped onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. "The Belmond," she said, looking around at the beautiful lobby, the happy guests, the future they'd built together. "Our legacy." "Our beginning," he corrected. She kissed him, right there in the middle of everything, and the city hummed on around them, indifferent and eternal. But for Poppy and Leo, the city wasn't indifferent anymore. It was home.